I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ivory Coast in West Africa. And my interest in trying to interact with that culture really came out through journalism, and I decided to start to write about it. For a long time, there was some frustration because it was a difficult thing to get people interested in Ivory Coast. The conflict was complicated, the names were foreign sounding, the places were foreign sounding. It was a lot to ask of people to try to learn about these people and what they were struggling with. And that sort of started a trajectory of finding ways to tell stories about places that would pull people in. The Everday Projects is in a lot of ways an extension of that. It started with Everyday Africa when Peter DeCampo and I were in Ivory Coast covering a story in March of 2012, when we were looking around us and documenting this place that was recovering from crisis and interviewing victims of war crimes and interviewing refugees who were coming home for the first time in a year and talking to former soldiers. And I was interviewing those people and Peter was taking those photographs, but we sort of noticed while we were doing this that it was sort of piling on. It was a lot of the same kind of thing. Another story about crisis in Africa, and that was very frustrating because I had spent so much time in Ivory Coast and I knew that this was a part of the world where for most of the people, most of the time, life was pretty normal. And Peter felt the same way from his time spent in Ghana. So we began to use our cell phone cameras to document what we saw around us in addition to the moments of crisis. The photograph of the kid having breakfast at the local cafe, people going to work, buying your cell phone at the local shopping mall. And so Everyday Africa began that way, and it was a way for Peter and I to sort of share photographs of everyday life with each other. It grew from that and became something where more and more photographers became interested, more and more photographers joined on, and eventually grew to a project that included mostly African photographers. And so it was not only a way to use photographs of daily life to combat stereotypes of that part of the world for people in the West, but also became a way to make connections between those African photographers and Western media outlets. Along the way, we began to notice other everyday projects, Everyday Asia, Everyday Latin America, Everyday Middle East, Eastern Europe, Jamaica, etc., and reached out to them and began to form a community of these everyday projects, so that today we are a nonprofit that is much larger than just Everyday Africa. The Everyday Projects are comprised of numerous everyday feeds all over the world, most of them geographic in focus, continents or regions or countries, sometimes cities, or even parts of cities like Everyday Bronx. But it has also become something that is a platform for issue-based feeds. There's Everyday Incarceration, there's Everyday Black America, there's Everyday Climate Change. Everyday Migration is one of the newer ones. Just after the election this past year, a woman in Baltimore began Everyday American Muslim. And so people have found that it's a worthwhile way of trying to make the everyday interesting, trying to make the mundane beautiful. And telling stories in that way, I think, not only is it something that people relate to, and not only is it something that people can learn something from, but they can identify with it because it's a format they understand. They understand Instagram. Everyone loves photography. Everyone loves getting on Instagram and sharing pictures with each other. And so if you can suddenly take that concept, that format, and use it in a way that's not just selfies, not just pictures of your cat, but photographs of what you see around you that tell real stories about these places, it turns into something much bigger than just an Instagram account.